Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villeray.
With a continued passion for public television, we are proud to underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES television.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, it is still not clear what the next step will be, but for now, the New Orleans Police Department is being managed by someone with the title of interim police chief. With pleas for a national search, the road to a permanent selection seems as distant as a decline in crime. Would-be candidates for the job might refer to a Times-Picayune New Orleans Advocate feature this week, showing the numbers and probabilities of the battles that they'll face. Crime is also on the list of the year's top business stories, but fortunately there were many other industry developments showing growth and ambition. We'll be looking at these stories tonight, and as we experience a Christmas that is frozen without the benefit of being white, we'll look at previous icy holidays. And joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Erol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, John Zimmerman, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, and Rich Collins, Associate News Editor, Biz New Orleans. We'll go on over to John first. And interim police chief now, interim police chief's named and now in position.
Yes.
So tell us about a woman, and African-American woman, first one for the police department to head the police department. Tell us about her.
Indeed, first woman to head the police department. As of yesterday, Thursday, the changeover was official. Michelle Woodfork, who was a captain and 31-year veteran of the NOPD, takes over for Sean Ferguson, who was there for almost 4 years, 4 very rocky years. Yeah. He's gone under a lot of pressure from the business community, very concerned about, understandably, about a surge in crime and an inability, it seems, to really get a handle on it. And so Michelle Woodfork is in. She's the niece of Warren Woodfork, who's a former NOPD chief, so she's got kind of a pedigree. Her dad was a police officer for NOPD, who then went to the DEA. Her cousin is Dana Douglas, the first black woman on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal as of last week. She won her confirmation. So she comes from a family of achieving people. She's been in the department a long time, mostly not somebody who's out there and that the public really has seen a lot of. She's been in 5 of the 8 police districts. She spent a lot of time as a sex crimes or as a child abuse detective and sergeant in that unit, which has had its issues over the years. She's most currently a captain in Management Services Bureau, which is kind of an administrative part of the NOPD. So she doesn't have experience commanding a police district like a lot of the past chiefs have had. She's gonna, she's an interim, and so we're gonna see how this all plays out with the city council confirmation process. And, it looks like Mayor Cantrell, or it sounds like she would like to see Michelle Woodfork become the permanent chief. She's talked a lot about homegrown talent while, pledging to do a national search with a consultant's help.
So definitely a national search, she says, is going to be conducted. But that doesn't mean that looking within the NOPD won't happen. Indeed, it will.
Yeah, the mayor has emphasized that, and she talked a lot about, homegrown talent being exported to other cities who are interested in people who, and she's sort of talking about that as we have enough talent within. To what extent that ultimately holds sway in the end once you bring in people from outside and see what their qualifications are. This is a pretty young department, and it has lost some people to other cities and other police agencies in the last few years. So we'll see how that plays out. But, maybe that's a nod to, the troops and the rank and file, or maybe she'll, stick it out and we'll see somebody emerge, if it's Michelle Woodfork or somebody else.
Ultimately the choice, the appointment is the mayor's choice. That part hasn't changed. What has changed is the council's, the council will have a process in interviewing the person. But, in theory, they can go through a national search, find this really great person, and say, here's this really great person that we want to have as the police chief, and she can say no. It's her appointment. And I don't know if there's any mechanics to change that at this point.
Not at this point. I mean, it's still the mayor's nominee.
Yeah.
But the council now, under this ordinance that passed this year, that voters passed, and that takes effect January 1st, the council will have a say over this, and they will be, be able to consent or not to this, and then, so that whole process is going to play out, and the mayor's basically agreed to that by naming Michelle Woodfork the interim under a lot of pressure.
So the council will have the final say.
Yeah, they will be able to, yay or nay, her decision. They can't force a national search. They can't tell her what decision. But ultimately, this is going to play out, and she's going to need the council to get behind her.
You know, John, we're hearing also from people who are, the officers that are currently on the force, that there's displeasure among a lot of them. They say that the culture needs to change. I mean, that's a very important issue.
That's something that whoever the next police chief is going to have to face. We've talked a lot about exit interviews and what these police officers complain about, and it's not all money. They are going to get a lot of money and bonuses and raises that have been offered up to keep people and bring some people back who've left for other agencies. But money is not even the primary issue that officers talk about. There's a lot of morale issues, a lot of sort of cronyism complaints and equipment complaints that the city is trying to address in bringing new cars and things. And so they're doing a lot to try to sort of please those who remain. But we're down to, 940 or fewer officers, a couple hundred below when Sean Ferguson started 4 years ago. So whoever takes over is working with a bit smaller of a deck.
Okay.
There's often been talk about cronyism in the police department. I think that's the nature of police departments. It's the sort of a quasi-military thing where you have your officers and your different levels. And there were times, I don't know if this is the case now, but the complaints were that they had the deputy chiefs, and there was one mayor's election where each deputy chief was aligned with a different mayoral candidate. I mean, there's been that level of politics up there.
Yeah, I mean, up there in the police brass, yeah, there is some of that still going on. Sure, I mean, as far as the rank and file and how they feel about what's going forward, it's PIB, it's the disciplinary process that they've complained about most, and sort of what officers consider unfair or unequal treatment when it comes down to discipline.
But certainly there are those that are pleased that the mayor did take this step in naming interim, so that after January 1st, new law goes into effect and the council has its say.
Yep, and we will see that play out.
Okay, all righty, John, thanks a lot. Rich, over to you. Okay, each year is always a busy year with good stuff, bad stuff, and you're going to focus right now on business stories, good and bad. So give us an idea, overall, what's your take? Was it a good year or what?
Well, unfortunately, our top two business stories of the year are both bummer stories. But there's a lot of good stories in here, too. Investment and development and some breakthroughs and things. So I can just run you through the list.
Let's jump into it.
This is what we created for Biz New Orleans this month's edition.
Okay.
So the number 10 top business story of the year is a surprise ruling causes chaos in the short-term rental industry. Full disclosure, I have an Airbnb in my house, so I do not have journalistic... I can't be fully
objective.
Objective,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
But so the problem here is there's people like me that have an Airbnb in their house, and it helps with a little extra income.
Sure.
Then there's the short-term rental operators who are out-of-towners that will buy up multiple houses in a historic downtown neighborhood, and essentially ruin the quality of life, and have parties in the streets, raise the cost of the houses. So the city tried to control that with the 2019 law that said you have to have a homestead exemption to be able to have an STR license. All is well until this surprise, this August, the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals said, nope, that law is unfair. Let's see, they said it was unconstitutionally restricting interstate commerce. So that was a big surprise. So the result is the city council froze all permits. No renewals, no new permits. So everybody right now is caught in limbo. Where the industry is waiting until March when the city council has promised a new plan.
Meanwhile, enforcement, how is it with the city? I mean, are they really tough?
Well,
are kind of lax? Or what?
So I did interview someone from the city earlier this year, and they did buy some software. It's a company called Granicus, And this software does, for the first time, allow the city to pair up a listing they find on Airbnb, let's say, and they can match it to the homeowner, and they can send a scary letter. So yeah, it's different than it was in previous years, right?
Okie doke, and more change to come. All right, number 9.
Number 9 is the nursing programs are expanding to fill demand. We have a nursing shortage problem across the country. The U.S. government right now estimates we need to bring in 200,000 new nurses a year to meet demand as the baby boomers get older, and a lot of nurses are retiring. So the result is everywhere in New Orleans, greater New Orleans as well, you're seeing a lot of new programs and a lot of partnerships between health systems and educators. So as you know, right next door, there's this huge, beautiful new building coming up
On Delgado's campus.
on
yeah.
Delgado's campus. So that's a collaboration with Ochsner. You've got Loyola University unveiling its new nursing lab with all these crazy robots. LSU Health is expanding north. Dillard's offering a new MS in nursing. Holy Cross, Chamberlain, Herzing, all these schools are beefing up their programs.
Okay, we'll see where that goes.
Yes.
Number 8.
Number 8, the Mississippi River dropped to record low levels. It was in October. It was the lowest level it had been in 10 years. So this is a bigger problem upriver, where people are trying to get their grain and everything downriver and out to the world. It's a concern because climate change might cause these problems more frequently, and 60% of the grain that the U.S. exports comes right down the Mississippi River before it heads in all directions. I did talk to Port Nola and the Port of South Louisiana this week before coming on the show, and actually neither one of them had many problems to speak of as a result. Water levels were high enough. The one thing is Port Nola had those new Viking River cruises, and they did have to reschedule a few of those because their destinations were problematic. But actually, Port of South Louisiana said its numbers were up.
Well, that's good. That is good news. Okay, number 7.
Another maritime story.
Yeah.
So Avondale Shipyard, which, as you know, at one time was the state's biggest employer, 26,000 employees. It had been shuttered for several years when in 2018, a maritime giant, T. Parker Host, bought Avondale Shipyard and has just brought it back into commerce this year. It's called the Avondale Global Gateway. And the plan is eventually for there to be tenants where there's manufacturing and refining and packaging, so people can take advantage of the logistical benefits there. As of now, really what it is operating as is a private port. They moved 1 million tons of cargo across its docks this year.
All right,
Well,
big hopes for
it's no
that
longer
one.
just a shipyard. though.
It's not a shipyard.
Yeah.
But we know, one interesting, I talked to one of the folks over there this week. Some of the products that they're moving are metals, and part of this tonnage they had this year came from cargo that was originally going to go to California, but all those log jams out in California, some of their clients ended up shipping it into the Gulf. They brought it here to the Avondale facility, and then they trained it back to California. So,
All right, let's
whatever
move
works.
along now. We got to move. Investment.
Investment in New Orleans East, it's the most populated area of the city and one of the least economically developed. A lot of new investment announced this year. I'll just run it really quick. Spanish conglomerate CalUSEM announced a $35 million cement manufacturing facility. Movie star Anthony Mackie, a New Orleans native, is planning a film studio. His family member Calvin Mackie is working on a STEM center out there. You've got D'Agostino Pasta coming back. Iria Pack, an Italian manufacturer of packaging, $7 million investment. So there's a lot of stuff going on.
Good. Okay, number 5.
Yep. Number 5 is more investment. This is clean hydrogen. So the U.S. Economic Development Administration awarded $50 million to a project called H to the Future. Really what they're trying to do is they're going to try and create green hydrogen using offshore wind and extracting the hydrogen from water instead of natural gas. It leaves no carbon footprint. It's kind of the way of the future, and it definitely aligns with Governor Edwards' plan to get to, lower the carbon numbers by 2050.
Right.
Big money, big excitement.
Big excitement. Okay, number 4.
Number 4, festivals are back. So,
Yes, they are.
Yeah, so we have 1,000 festivals or festival-adjacent events this past year. The biggest, of course, being Jazz Fest. We had a 2-year hiatus, which was terrible for morale. All you noticed was the potholes and the crime. But now with the festivals back, you remember the culture. It's also a huge economic boost. Jazz Fest alone, $400 million economic impact.
And it's fun for all of us.
Fun for all.
And
Okay.
Jazz Fest was the subject of a nationally distributed movie, which was really good.
Yeah.
So people, yeah.
Number 3.
Number 3 is a big one. I talked about it last time I was on here. LCMC Health's plans to purchase the Tulane affiliated hospitals from HCA Healthcare. Right now, the plans are still rolling. It has not been approved yet by federal or state regulators, but it's expected to be. That basically means we'll have two major health systems in New Orleans. The consolidation, you have Ochsner and LCMC.
Okay, number 2.
Number 2, it's a bummer. These are the 2 bummer ones. Insurance
Yeah, it's a bummer
costs.
one. You're right.
I don't. How's this going to work out right now? The storms happened. The insurers had to pay billions of dollars. We've lost 9 smaller insurers failed this past year. 11 others are leaving. So 600,000 claims were made. Payments just residential alone was $11 billion. So the industry is terrified to come down here. It's sending everyone to Citizens. Citizens said they're going to raise their rate 63% in January.
Right, in order to have enough money in there to pay off.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's untenable.
It's scary.
As anyone who
definitely
owns a piece of property here, it's terrifying. And then, of course, the flood insurance reconfiguration,
Right.
just compounding the problem.
That's all right.
Because flood insurance is going to go up by mysterious amounts.
All right, number 1.
Number 1, you can probably talk to better than me, but it's the crime problem. In addition to just all the horrible tragedies that you read about and all the lives affected, the crime is also, from a business community standpoint, it creates horrible optics. The people are, you see international headlines again talking about New Orleans as the murder capital, which we are per capita. So the one, I guess you could call it a positive, the business community has rallied. There's a group called the NOLA Coalition, which is now 400 plus members strong, nonprofits, business groups, individuals. Their plan is to invest in youth development and also to just show support for NOPD, raise funds, and just support NOPD in any way they can.
So overall business climate in the metro area and really in the state too, what would you say?
Well, I mean, there's all the federal funds coming in. There's a lot of new investment. So you've got that on the exciting side of things, and then there's all the uncertainty because of extreme weather and crime. So it's kind of I'd say it balances out.
Okay, all right, Rich, thanks a lot.
Sure.
John, over to you. We're going to stay on the crime numbers. You did a piece looking at stats, and this is for the city of New Orleans. Really disturbing to hear what you reported, to read what you reported. Tell us about it.
Yeah, murder's been up nationally and in big cities in particular since the pandemic began, but it's been going down in most cities and elsewhere and subsiding. In New Orleans, it's not. It's continued to surge. Things have leveled off in the last couple of months, but we're looking at the highest murder rate since the 90s, except for a couple of years after Katrina where the population was kind of screwy. Yeah, so this is really bad. It's kind of a generational high in murders. And so we're trying to understand why other cities are going, why we keep surging. And so we took a look at the best data is on who is being killed and talking to family members and experts and things. And, there's some, it's sort of across the board, but it's still really focused on black males, in that 15 to 34, 15 to 54. The age has gone up a little bit from that sort of younger black males.
And the victims, you're talking about the victims.
Right, and so we got some NOPD homicide data and coroner's data and things like that and put them together. And the NOPD data shows that, your homicide victim, your murder victim is a 35-year-old black male, like your typical, who was killed in an argument with a younger black man with a handgun. And so, it's still sort of in the neighborhoods that have traditionally been really hardest hit by violence in the 7th district, in the 7th ward, in the 5th ward. And so you can see, so it's the same kind of demographic that's always been killed at a high rate in New Orleans nationally since the 70s.
So we see you refer to arguments, but what about retaliation too?
There is some of that, it's hard to, you can see it in some of the killings, some of these obvious, drive-bys or the shoot-ups at a Dollar General or what have you. And a lot of these are targeted killings, and you can see by the amount of gunfire, for instance. But are there more of those than before? Is it sort of a higher rate of those? It's really hard to say. There's a lot of gun data that's kind of missing. But you can see it. I mean, there's a lot of that. Our intelligence, the NOPD's sort of knowledge of, all of the gangs and groups that are out there is shrunken quite a bit in the last few years. Part of that is the murder rate went down and the focus went elsewhere. Part of the thing about this current surge is just the kind of whiplash effect of it. I mean, we were at our lowest point in almost 50 years in 2019 with 110 to 20 murders, and now we're up at 260. So it's pretty jarring just from a kind of getting a grip on it. And a lot of mental health issues out there. And when you look at murder by murder, whether it's the perpetrator or the victim, there seem to be when you look at commitments, 72-hour commitments, involuntary psychiatric commitments, those are up. They were last year almost double the year before.
And so also in your piece, you note that a number of these victims were people who had served time in prison, come out, only then to face street justice.
We're trying to understand this little increase in age that we're seeing in black male victims, and you find in the stories that some people coming out of prison recently, fairly recently, some after long prison terms, and a lot of people seem to have sort of gotten through the last big kind of increase and spike in murders, which was around 2010, 2011, when they might have been younger and a lot of have violent things on their arrest records and whatnot. So yeah, I mean it's interesting, and I couldn't really tell you the answer. Not a lot of answers out there for why that aging population. There's certainly a lot of guns on the street, and the more people carrying them in self-defense than willing to use them.
How about carjackings? Is that leveling off, or is it still?
Yeah, I mean, it's leveled off from the craziness of earlier this year, but you still see them in the morning, lineup of crimes all the time.
I was going to ask that too, because I noticed looking at the Metro Crime Commission stats today that they have leveled off. They just haven't dropped. So everything's still rising, and that stopped rising, but it didn't really drop.
They're still going on. I know how many of those lead to like murders, or how many of the guns taken in some of these. A lot of people breaking into cars for guns. We still don't know that. How many of those guns are being used immediately kind of on violent
So the
crimes.
depleted force, is that looked at as a main reason why we're seeing this uptick?
I think there's a perception of police issue that some people think is a contributor, and a perception that they're not there, that they don't care, or that or they're not there to help you. As far as the manpower, certainly that affects how many times people see police, and that's why I think that they've been trying to get more officers out on the street and just to bring out that presence.
And then also solving these crimes, solving murders.
33% arrests, 33% of the murders this year have led to an arrest. It's been going down for decades nationally. That's not a great number. But so there's a lot of people who've killed out there, and a lot of people, family members of those people who have been killed, who know they're out there.
Yeah. All right, John. Well, as you said, the interim police chief and ultimately the next permanent one has a big job before them.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. All right, E. We are having a cold, cold Christmas.
Yeah, we are. But there have been worse, actually. But the coldest on record was in '83. And that was the Christmas day itself. That was like 15 degrees at the lowest. But I think the one that a lot of people will remember in terms of the Christmas season is the Christmas season of '89. That was when this cold system came across from Texas, actually. And Christmas was on a Sunday. By that Thursday, the temperatures were dropping. I think there was like 12 degrees, and the next day it was 11 degrees. It was a lot of rain and ice. And I remember that Friday actually being at work, and civil authorities were saying everybody who was at work should go home. So all of a sudden you had all these people leaving work, driving on ice. And these are people who are not familiar with driving on ice. It would have been better had they told everybody to stay in the office at least. Okay. And so that became a mess. By Christmas Eve, the temperatures were still low. The problem is people's pipes were broken all around town. This is not,
I remember that.
You're warm and happy Christmas Eve, and people's pipes were broken. And by Christmas Day, it was still cold, but it was starting to thaw out a little bit. But once they thawed out, that means that water was squirting out of people's pipes. And so it wasn't Santa Claus who was the most anticipated person. It was the plumber. A couple of other things that were just newsworthy at the time. There was an explosion caused by the coal at the Exxon refinery in Baton Rouge. There had been a leakage for some of the tanks, and there was this huge explosion. And then also that week, actually on January 3rd, former Mayor Dutch Moriel died. And according to the coroner's report, that the death was a heart attack caused by asthma condition that he'd had aggravated by the cold weather. And so the cold weather actually took one victim that we know of, and it was a former mayor. Internationally, that was when the Ceausescu family was captured and executed. And so while this was going on, communism was crumbling. And Noriega was being chased in Panama, and he was captured by the United States. And so internationally, it was a big time, but it was a big time in New Orleans, too.
Okay, of course, remember 2004, we did
Oh,
have
yeah, I forgot to
snowfall.
mention, 2004, we did have snow. It was about a half-inch of snow. Where I was, it started almost exactly at noon. And so just as people were sitting down, and that was just a great moment. Especially, you know, and a lot of people said, blamed Katrina, which would follow later that year, on the snowfall on Christmas. He said, look, you know, this shows nature was out of whack, okay? So we had snow on Christmas, and so he came back and gave us Katrina.
Yeah,
but that was a good moment.
Yeah, you said, you know, we were, my family and I were getting ready to sit down and have that Christmas dinner, looked out and said, snow, turkey can be cold, and everybody ran outside.
Yeah, so what do you do?
it
Do you
was
go
a great
frolic in the
afternoon.
snow, or do you...
I remember snow angels and all that.
Eat the turkey, yeah, no, that's so...
All righty, well, you know, we're enduring this cold one, so we'll get through this one too. All righty, guys, other stories. E, over to you.
A couple weeks ago, Air France ran 2 flights nonstop from New Orleans to Paris. It's sort of like an experiment, but there's also a big convention that had a high demand from going from New Orleans to Paris. Air France officials are looking at it. It doesn't mean it's going to be a nonstop, but they're not ruling out the possibility that maybe in a couple of years that there can be a nonstop from New Orleans to Paris. Meanwhile, the British Airlines nonstop, which started off as being 2, then went to 4. Now there's talk about in the new year it'll go up to 5 times a week.
Wonderful, good news. All righty, John, over to you.
Well, I may have a story next week about an interesting case where a facial recognition technology was used to arrest somebody who wasn't the guy. So it's an interesting technology. It's kind of controversial, but it's being used more and more by law enforcement, so we'll get into that.
Be looking for that. Rich?
Well, I would say one of the biggest business stories of the year didn't happen till just the last few days, so that's why it wasn't on the list. But the governor threw his weight behind the container terminal in St. Bernard Parish. So that was sort of one of the dominoes people were waiting to fall. It's a huge, huge investment in St. Bernard. It's controversial, but as Portnola will tell you, it's essential for them to keep up with Houston, Mobile, Tampa, because as these ships get bigger, they need to have more. They need to be able to take the bigger ships and be able to keep up with the competition. So I know Portnola is excited about the next, steps in the process.
Okay, we'll see where that goes too. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here around the table, and thank you all for joining us too. Have a very, very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a continued passion for public television, we are proud to underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES Television.